Okay, I'm glad to see Kristen and Hannah. Glad to have you aboard. And we'll pop over here. We're going to get started as usual a little bit early. And folks can, of course, go back, as I always say, and take a look at the beginning here. Now, what I want to do is just, again, give us a quick overview of the week. And since we're coming upon that midpoint of the semester, weeks 7 and 8, I want to talk about what we've got going on there, and then we'll come back and we're going to take a little bit of an overview of chapter 7 and 8. I had the web safari items there. I probably had some comments about those. I do have some TED guest lectures, and as I said, they're required viewing, and I definitively want everyone, please go view these. These are excellent discussions. So we've got a variety of things here today to do and to look at. I want to make certain that everybody is aware of the fact that we've got the MDPs due, and then, of course, the interactive session, and then you have the 2 exams. Now, as you probably saw from last week, I tend to look for certain things in response to what you have to say. And my main harp last week was the absence of any headings. For a lot of people just simply didn't use headings, and some people didn't cite sources. And some of them, when they did, the sources were not formatted properly. Let me start first with the headings, and it always puzzles everybody. So why do you harp about this? Headings are important because they do 2 things. First of all, they show the reader the major sections of what you're going to discuss. And I would say even in a formal business memo, you should have headings so that it's quite clear, because what you'll often get from someone saying business is they'll say, okay, I see your memo. Where's your executive summary? I've got 5 minutes, that type of thing. The other is that it guides it shows that you've done some thought about what you have to say. Now, I supply you bullet points or headings in terms of the directions that I give you. And I'm going to do this again, really one more time. And here we are. Now, when the cursor is sitting on your screen and it's just blinking at you, and I understand that feeling. I've been there and done that. Here it is. The key idea or concept, the MDP illustrates, okay, where you find it, 3 articles or sources that deal with it, the current status of the firm, okay, and I say sources cited must conform to APA format, and I've shown everybody, I'm certain at least one time, how to utilize the reference tool in Microsoft Word, to create APA format references that are formatted as they ought to be. So that's one key piece. And the second thing I find is a lot of folks citing the textbook, which is nice, but it shows me you're not going beyond that. And my hunch would be, if you check the textbook on those MDPs or those cases, you're going to find that there are some references there or footnotes that will guide you on, or you just simply didn't go into, say, the OBU library, which I think we visited online, where you can find those resources that you might need just doing a simple search. So it's been my biggest issue. And I'm doing this because I know in other classes, faculty will have you do one big paper, and doing report writing and technical writing of that type is very important. I can tell you for sure that as you go out to work, you're going to ask to produce a lot of short reports, memos, maybe, and your boss will never say, I want 1,000 words or anything like this. But what they probably will want will be an executive summary that has enough meat on the bones for them to understand, and that distills the question. So I provide you the bullet points right there. Let me go back over here for a moment, and we'll take a look at the interactive sessions piece. Okay, that's a little bit different, but again, I include the instructions for them. All right, and I want you to just answer the case study questions. Each of those cases has a set of questions, so those are your bullet points or your major headings. Okay, and then have a reference. Okay, and I think that I don't tell you to there, but you really should never do academic writing without a reference, because if you do, there are some professors, I'm not one of them, who will not give you the benefit of the doubt, and they will simply say this is a case of academic integrity. And technically they're right. When you write something and you don't credit somebody, and you've clearly have borrowed their work, you've read their chapter or whatever, you need to cite that source. So I want to get you guys used to doing that, if not already. That would be the major thing. Now, most of you did a good job of connecting, and then I'm talking about last week, connecting a concept in the case to some concept or concepts back in the textbook. And that's really where I want to see the linkage, so that you make the linkage between a real life situation and one that's out there in theory. Okay, so that's been a big part of what I've been saying. Now, all that being said, we'll go back over here, and we're going to talk some more. I spend a little bit more time. Let me make one point here, just a second. Right here, I'm glad I thought of this. Right here, you're going to see that I give you a choice in terms of the MDPs that you use. And you can use 6.8, 6.9, or 6.10. Now, my favorite among these is 6.10. The reason is I provide you with a database and give you some specific questions that you'll have to use the database to run some queries to answer. That's my favorite, because then I really get to see it, do some work, provide some data, do something that's pretty much common among a lot of what you'll do at work at times. And at times you'll do a report, you probably won't even write anything. You might do a PowerPoint or something like this. Okay, so 6.10 is probably my favorite, and I think it's a very interesting case. Now, I want to pop over to chapter 7 for just a little bit and talk about it some. Okay, and I'm just going to come over here to the contents section at Vital Source, and we'll pop on down here and we'll see these. And the text is organized into different parts. Okay, as we see that. All right, I'll go back here. And chapter 7 is gonna be down here in the part 2, and we're looking at chapters 7 and 8. Okay, and 7 and 8 conclude this chapter on really the infrastructure, or the physical aspects of information systems and the internet and all those things that get connected together. And chapter 7 deals with the wireless, and covering it provides us this little opening case with RFID, which is a radio frequency ID. Okay, and you're going to see some terms in the textbook. And I want to take just a second to talk about it. The two that I think are probably the most have the greatest potential for us is the RFID, which is the radio frequency ID tag, okay, which is a tag that's attached to a product or embedded in a product. And the other is called NFC, okay, and that's not the NFC in the NFL. That's near field communication. The RFID is a way to tag an item so it can be tracked. And sometimes an RFID will have a kind of a I guess not a computer, but it will be able to, it will be able to not, it will be able to serve maybe like a monitor, and send data back. But again, it has some limitations. Now, the NFC near field communications, Walmart recently experimented with it, where folks walked through this. They bought their items. They had the Walmart NFC app on their phone, and they went through an area, and so everything was scanned, okay, and the bill was created, and the money was taken from their account. And people and Walmart introduced this, and they got some really adverse feedback. People were just kind of nervous about it. Now, it's interesting to me that they were, and they said they preferred scanning. Well, I remember when scanned items were first introduced, and people were very skeptical about them and thought, oh, I'm going to get overcharged or undercharged or the wrong product, and on and on and on. And so now scanners have gained some acceptance or some foothold with consumers, and that technology, that's useful technology. And today, like I say, everybody goes to the store. They have scanners. A lot of people will scan an item to get a price. You can walk in the store and do that. So it's one of these things where we have these technologies coming, and they just kind of, after a while, there's a fairly predictable process. It's called the S curve of innovation, where people will adopt a technology. And these are things that we really don't have any idea at this point of how they will impact businesses. What we do know is this: with for example, with near field communication, with somebody walking by, and we're close to that with scanners, and they just do the transaction on the phone. Basically, they scan what you have. They go to you have an app, and you're scanned, and you get, and the items are charged off of your account, and you have it drawn off your Walmart credit card if you have one of those, or off of your debit card or your credit card that you carry, and away you go. Where this will all head, we're just not sure. And again, there are going to be some technologies that will catch on and really become embedded. There are others that just simply may not, and nobody knows for sure at this point. But I can tell you that, having looked at especially the RFID, the tags, they have revolutionized the industry. And if you buy anything online today, okay, and you go into UPS or FedEx and you do a search of your product as it's being delivered, they're using an RFID tag. Then you go into the server over there at UPS, and they give you an ID number, and that matches a database of stuff that's being transported, and they fire out a signal to that RFID, and the RFID responds, or it doesn't respond. It's just scanned, or somehow the coordinates are given, and boom, away you go. And if it's the coordinates in one of their places, they'll say it's in transit or it's in the warehouse, whatever. And that's going to become more and more specific as we get down. And I think maybe in 15, 20 years, somebody will have it down to either UPS, FedEx, or somebody will have things down to the point where they'll say it will be there by 2:30 or 3 o'clock. As it is now, they give you a window of a day, and there are going to be those. And one of these days, that will just simply not be good enough as a competitive issue. So somebody who's in the logistics business, well, if you're a retailer or an e-tailer, and someone comes to you and says, I can tell your customer exactly what time it will be there, you're going to have a tremendous competitive advantage, because that's going to be a level of convenience that no one has put together. So it's a good case study, okay, as far as how one of the ways that we use these telecommunications structures that we've got. And the chapter is going to walk you through the prospects of all of that. That section on the different types of networks, I think, are it's good for you to understand what what we mean by analog versus digital, and they in terms of things like music, analog and digital. I can tell you that while you might, if you were to take, for example, again, here's another one of these things. Here's an industry, the music industry, that's really been impacted by this. If you took it, there are people today who collect the old records, the 45s, and the 45s, and then the LP albums. I think those are in '89, and that you played on a record player. And if you put, my wife has collected one of those, and she has a whole collection of records. If you play an album, it has a whole different feeling or sound than does a digitally remastered work. But the digitally remastered work is the one that's going to be distributed more easier to distribute. So you can see here's one of those ways in which understanding those functions is good. Now, moving from analog and going over to digital, has enabled everybody to do all types of things with the computer, like view movies, listen to music, send emails, all of that stuff. Because with a computer, with the digital, you see the ones and zeros. That enables you to break things up into packets, and we talked about that before. There's some sections here on management monitoring, net neutrality. And I want to just take just a few moments to talk about this issue of net neutrality. Okay, it's one of those things that often is quite misunderstood, and it's misunderstood in the sense that people don't really get what that term neutrality means. Okay, here's what it means. For anybody to get onto the internet, okay, to use the internet, you have to have an internet service provider, okay? And that internet service provider has to go through a series of steps to be able to do that. You don't just start up your own ISP and say, "Hi, here we are." It's a regulated firm, just like a phone company or any utility. It's been handled. The internet in this country has been handled like a utility, okay? And basically what they've said is everybody first come, first serve, and there's been no your ability to access data, the amount of data that you consume has been driven on the basis of just the simple fact that you have the right to be there. It's a public space. And the other is driven by the fact that, well, okay, if there are people who are using a tremendous amount of bandwidth, okay, that's fine, and they pay for it, but it can't be at the expense of the normal, ordinary user who gets shut out of the process. And when you get down to it, okay, where we're headed now is a system where if you consume a lot of data, and let's say your ISP is, let's say Cox Communications, and Cox decides, well, this firm over here is a big customer, and they consume a lot of data, and they have a data plan where they pay us per data usage. It's not unlimited. And I have just an individual family over here. I'm going to throttle the individual families. And that is, I'm going to slow down their speeds and move my resources over to this big firm that I'm serving. And that starts to become an issue where you have firms behaving almost like a monopoly, and monopolies do that. They will choose the customer who provides them, or quasi monopolies that provides them the highest budget return, the highest return on budget, or the highest budget. That is, they buy the most stuff, and then they'll cut the little person right out of it. And this is not too different than some of the battles that occurred back in the 19th century in the United States, when we had the railroad going across, as the railroads was coming across from the eastern seaboard to California. And there were battles between the railroad and communities, the communities saying, hey, wait a minute, we're being left out of the mix. We don't have railroad service. And how you became a major and established city was you had the railroad. And that was an important thing because everything was moved by rail. And so it was very similar, and the railroads would just, if you didn't have a certain population, or you didn't play ball with the railroad, they just cut you right out of the deal. And they found somebody else they just bypassed you and went down on the road and found somebody else. That's why in some places, I'll give you a good example, some places like Missouri, where that battle was fought the hardest, I remember that there are a couple of towns I've been in where the railroad literally runs right down the middle of Main Street. It's the most comical, ridiculous thing you've ever seen. And while you'll see sometimes that, in the state of Oklahoma, for example, okay, the state of Oklahoma, the railroad line went through Oklahoma City, okay? And it was because it was, in terms of topography, it was the easiest way for them to build the line. And so Guthrie got cut out of it. In fact, in the middle of the night, the governor and the cabinet, a lot of legislators just went to Oklahoma City and said, Oklahoma City is now the capital. And it was primarily driven by the railroads. And there were cities that you've probably read about in Westerns or history, in places like Abilene, Kansas, etc., that were places that basically existed to serve the railroad, with the long cattle drives, and then eventually saw the railroads, expanding on further as they went to places where folks started growing large quantities of wheat or other types of mass-produced agricultural products. Well, that being said, that helps you, I think, understand net neutrality. And net neutrality just simply says it doesn't matter how much you pay, you're not going to be throttled, okay? Now, if a provider can't give you enough bandwidth so that everybody's happy, then the provider's obligated to go get more bandwidth, build more towers, whatever they need to do. But under this one, under the current regulations that have been proposed, an ISP can simply say, I have so much bandwidth and I'm going to sell it to the highest. I'm going to use an auction method, and those who want to pay X amount a month or X amount, or by the usage level, they pay it. And if you don't, too bad, I'm not going to service you. So this thing of net neutrality, which has flown under the radar, is of exceptional importance to all of us, because what it essentially does is it puts these ISPs in the position of almost being like monopolies. And there are some firms, and I'm not going to name them, who have pushed this, who are going to benefit from this greatly. And the public, this is just my opinion, will be harmed by this, because access to high-speed internet is absolutely fundamental and critical for every single major household. It's a utility today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Well, again, that battle there, and they talk about Netflix, which is and Netflix and YouTube are the big users, obviously, because of so much music and movies and TV shows and that type of thing that they handle. as far as the rest of that chapter, again, these things like the standards for different systems and different technologies, these are being made up or worked on or developed as we go forward. It's not really any different from how electricity came into being in the United States and was distributed. The telephone system, the same story, and it's one of these things that the internet, and if you think of it as a utility, then you can understand how these firms behave. And again, the people like OG&E, for example, gas and electric, that's what they do. They provide it to you. The state regulates them and says you can only make so much profit a year, okay? And so OG&E has to operate accordingly. Now, what we've seen across the board has been the development of, well, at the start of all of this, and this is like in the late 90s, early 2000s, you'd have a service provider, ISP, come into a town and cut a contract with the city government or the county government. And you'd have a contract for services. And sometimes you got a good deal and sometimes you got a bad deal. So, and because the contracts were often on an exclusive basis, meaning if for example, Shawnee says, okay, we're going with Verizon. Well, no matter how bad Verizon ever gets, you've got them till you get rid of them. And that's when the contract ends. And those service providers would come in and they'd often offer the moon and the stars and the sun and deliver very, very little. And a lot of communities suffered from that. A lot of people were very frustrated because they thought, hey, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get all this and this and this, and I'm not getting it. Now, obviously, the larger cities had the greater bargaining power because they had the greater number of eyeballs, and that only makes sense. So that's kind of been worked through now, but there have been some fears that the open competition that was out there that allowed, like Oklahoma City, to have, I don't know how many ISPs we have now, the internet service providers, probably a dozen, maybe more. That competition is healthy because people say, look, if Cox didn't treat me well, I'll go to Verizon. If they don't treat me well, I'm going to AT&T or Vive or anyone. And there are a whole bunch of these little startup companies that they've decided all they're going to do is get you access. They're going to buy you they're going to buy a portal for you and bandwidth. They will provide you no other service. They're as bare bones as they can get. There's a lot of these other ones. They market out to folks, elderly people, and they'll try to sell them a giant cell phone, with the giant buttons and maybe a little dinky browser that you can do just certain things so grandma can send an email and stuff like that. Okay, so that's a lot of what's going on there in terms of that telecommunications infrastructure. And it's been something that's been of interest to me primarily because I have a couple of family members who worked in that industry and had a little bit of experience with it. Now, I want to pop back over here now to chapter. Let's see. I'm going to pop over here now to chapter 8. Okay. And we'll go back over here to back to the section, table of contents. And again, this is not necessarily the most exciting stuff, but it is important for us to talk about. And again, we back over here about in terms of securing information systems. We talked about those, and the most important. They ask you what are the most important tools in safeguarding, and frankly, really what it comes down to is the individual and people in the company or the organization who have been trained to be careful about security. That ranges all the way. Most of the time, data breaches occur because somebody does something stupid. Now today there was an email floating in my OB email, and you could clearly tell it was a phishing exercise. They were asking you for to click in, and we get 2 or 3 of these a week. There's a reason, and the reason is they're interested in the data of college students. As I've said before, identity thieves love college students because you have just enough of an identity out there to establish it. Yeah, it's a real human being, and just but you haven't made all those major purchases, etc. So there's a person around whom credit worthiness can be created, and at that point, then there's one or two things that happen. Identity thieves, they either take this identity they've created. There are three ways those folks make their money, okay? Number one, they take just raw data, raw names and social security numbers and passwords on it, and they send it to somebody who processes it, okay? All right, this is any different than the folks in Afghanistan who, while we're fighting to save their country, are the same people who sell poppy, which is the basis for heroin, all over the world. It's a cash crop. And so, when the United States went and said, you got to stop doing that, the people said, no, it's my cash crop. And so we've got people who just basically sell that stuff. Then we have the people who sell some of it that's processed. Some of the identity has been built in, or maybe they focused on a major credit card or created licensed driver's license. There are a whole bunch of specialties out there. Then there's the full service boutique that in the end creates an entire person and then uses that data to conduct a breach or uses it on a periodic basis. The people that sell names can get, depending on the quality of the data they sell, just the raw data, they can get hundreds of thousands of dollars for millions of pieces of data. They're kind of like somebody who's stolen, they are like people who work in terms of stolen goods, okay? And that's why when people rob a bank today, I think they've probably seen enough movies and probably know enough that if you ask for them to put the cash into the bag, they're also going to put an explosive device, and so that when you open the bag, you and everything around you will be purple along with the money. So it won't be of much good. So now people who are really sophisticated thieves have figured out, why would I go in at gunpoint and do that when I can just simply breach their system, grab their money, or do ransomware and have a big time. Ransomware is just a whole nother thing. So the chapter does a pretty good job of trying to walk you through that the steps that you have to take to secure your information system. And again, they give you one of the opening case where they show you this global banking and that hack, and then the types of vulnerabilities that these firms have, that every firm has. And again, as they talk about the most important tools, in my mind, the most important tools are, one, encrypted systems. And OBU has a virtual private network, which is basically encrypted communication. And I think those are number one. I think number two is a highly trained, highly thoughtful population of people who are smart enough to understand, if I walk away from my computer and I'm in my email, I pose a security threat. If I'm walking around, or if I lose my computer or my cell phone and it's issued by my company, or I lose it, period, I've created a threat. So those are things that you try to train people and work with them, and you do the best you can. But ultimately, there will be someone who will lose a computer full of information, or that person who will walk in and who will use a thumb drive and get a whole bunch of data and walk out the door, like the guy at WikiLeaks. That's literally what he did. Was he took thumb drives and walked out. That's why in a lot of facilities or companies are very concerned about that. If you come in, You have to have a clear bag so they can see. And you have to be willing to go open your pockets and let someone search you if they need to, because you could be walking out with something. But the guy at WikiLeaks, I think he uploaded some data, but he also walked out with just a thumb drive of several thumb drives of data. So Chapter 18 gives you good insight. It gives you some pretty good insights on security. And I can say this, the folks who work in that field and are knowledgeable about it they're a hard resource to find, and they can pretty much command their price at this point. And let me say this, if you're ever out there and you're a business owner and you're wanting to enhance your security, okay, go talk to somebody that does cybersecurity. If you are at a stage where you want to hire people to be with you as vendors, you're going to want people who have some law enforcement, military, and computing experience. And the best is really a combination of all three of them. If you get someone who just has a degree in it but never did any real work out in the real world, this is why they're so hard to find, because you can take courses on it, but in the end, it's just something you learn over time. Good friend of mine at church is retired, but he was a bank fraud specialist. He went all over the world, and that was his thing. He had a CPA degree. He'd studied criminal. He had a CPA. Then he went and got a degree in criminal justice. He studied, and then he went and got a JD. So he's a highly educated person. But the thing that made him so valuable is he had so much experience in understanding bank fraud and how it happens that people were always wanting him. And his real credential was his experience, i.e. his expertise in handling that and working with it. So that was a couple of key things I wanted to as far as Chapter 8. And again, the case studies that are included in this chapter, all of this is still murky and very murky and still quite in flux, for a simple reason that we're concerned about individual privacy, okay, versus security. This isn't too much different than the issues that face for example, people in the airlines who have to be concerned about passenger safety and security versus the rights of passengers. And again, it's one of those issues that cuts both ways. And so as we work our way through these processes and try to find out, okay, at what point are we monitoring people too much? At what point are we really not as tight on all of this as we ought to be? There's a fine line, and there is no simple answer to any of it. And anyone who would tell you that there is just simply not playing with a full deck of cards. And the biggest issue around all of this, and why people are so concerned, is because essentially all of us in a modern economy are really a number of sorts. You have an ID number. For school, you have your social security number. You have a driver's license number. And these are, if you remember from data admin, primary keys. And once you've got the primary key, you can get to the table if you want to. You at least have a sense of what's in there. And so our identities can be more easily compromised than we want to believe. And our data streams are, if the general public really understood what they're signing when they sign for a cell phone, they'd stop selling. The sales of cell phones would stop tomorrow. Next time you go and get a cell phone contract, read the contract, take a look and see what they say they're telling you, and read it closely, because what you're basically doing is saying, I'm surrendering the rights, all this data the phone company can collect on me, okay? And they can sell that data if they want to. And if they want to, they can turn my stuff over to law enforcement without me ever knowing about it. On and on and on. And the question that's there, and one of my friends with whom I wrote some books early on in my career, his thing was freedom of information. In fact, he's one of the people he was a key consultant when they wrote the Freedom of Information Act. And to make a long story short, there was this issue of what does privacy mean in terms of my digital technology? Now, we know privacy out in the real world, the physical world, we understand that. For example, if you get stopped by a policeman and they order you to go through your car without what would be due cause, they've got a problem. If they say they want to search you unless they have due cause, they've got a problem. Your physical space, then your home. Your home. One of the reasons that that these raids that they've had on these people that worked for Trump have been in the 6 in the morning on Sunday is simple. Your home is your castle. Your home is a sacred space given our rights as citizens. And when someone's going to come into your home and invade it, they'd better have a good reason. They better have a warrant. Now, there are those times when those things get violated. But if you remember back when Osama bin Laden was executed, the treasure trove, the thing they were after was, number one, they wanted to kill him. Number two, they weren't going to take him alive. No way. Number two, they wanted all of the electronic devices in that compound. Why? It was a treasure trove and a linkage to every single person who was of importance in Al-Qaeda, because they knew all the data. He was the node on the network where all the data flowed. And one of the problems with those organizations is they tend to be command and control, and they tend to have one person who runs them, and then a group of people who answer that person. They're like a classic family-owned company, and they're kind of like a mafia, and so they model these terrorists and criminal groups. Kind of have that organizational model. You probably never thought of it like that, but it makes it easy to find them, because once you hit that right node, boy, you've got everybody and anybody you want to go after. Now, just as an interesting thing, something interesting to talk about here. My two nephews, between the two of them, they were both Rangers in the United States Army, and between the two of them, they did 5 tours of Afghanistan and Iraq. And their job, they were digital specialists, and their job was to go in, and when we've killed the bad people, get all their phones, any electronic toys, TVs, everything, and gather them up and take them off to be analyzed. And they spent, I think, it was nearly 2 years taking classes, and they came out to see me one Christmas, and I had a computer, and I said, I'm just curious, how long would it take you to take this apart and put it back together? They took my computer apart and told me how they would drain all the data, and then they had the computer put back together in about 12 minutes. That's pretty impressive. Now, they trained 2 years to do that, and of course, when you're dealing with bad people, you have to get in and get out. But that was their thing. And when I asked them, how secure are all of our systems as individuals, they just kind of shook their head and said, so that's that classic issue that we're all trying to deal with, is the individual's need for privacy versus the organization's need. Now, I would say this, and this comes down to one final piece, and it is kind of, you probably have discussed this in HR class. If you haven't, you probably will, or business law, or maybe both. And that's the issue of your body. Now, I can tell you that you're going to run into more and more employers, especially if you work in those in the financial services or work in security, or you go to work for, say, somebody like a church, or say someone like the BGCO or an OBU, where they will ask you to give them, when you sign on, they may ask you to take a blood test, and they will hold the right to give you a blood test on a periodic basis, and or the right to see what your physician is prescribing you, and what the insurance company is paying for, and that type of thing, and disclosure. Now, that makes people uncomfortable, but we're going to see more and more of that as we go along, and in your lifetime, it will become a really, really big thing. So if you decide to go work for a big company, let me encourage you, and I'd say even in many companies, and it's already probably happening, is issues around tobacco usage, and are you, what they may even say, we want our DNA test to see what you might be, what potential diseases you have, because it's going to change your insurance premiums. And these are information technologies. They are. And all I can tell you is it's interesting. I had, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in a place where doctors told me, I said, this is Matt, 7 years ago, I'm sorry, that my physicians told me I was dying. And so they wanted to collect a bunch of data from me. And so they attached these monitors and all these things. And I thought, okay, they're getting all this data. What are they going to do with it? And I asked them, so what do you do with all this? They said, well, it goes in case records. And I sit today and I wonder how much of my data was used for somebody's study, for some publication they put together, how much of it was fed over to some pharmaceutical company that was developing drugs. Who knows? But that was information, and it was collected with sensors and then sent to computers and monitors, and that's digital. Well, folks, listen, it's about 2:42. I started a little bit early, and I want to stop now and find out if there are any questions that I could try to answer for some of you. I see AJ, Alex, Brady, Brooke, Cade, Dean, Hannah, Jack, Jan, Kristen, Michael, Mr. Lotka, Olivia, Taylor. Anybody else? Anybody have a question? Nobody? You're sure about that? Okay, well, just to emphasize one more time, if you haven't done it, I want you to go ahead and go through these guest lectures over at TED. As I said, they're required viewing, so if you haven't gone over there, I'd like to have you go over and take a look. And they're required viewing because they're just going to add a lot more. These are the top experts in the field, and I want you to hear what they have to say. And then certainly the web safari, and you've got some good sites there. We'll just pop over for a second. When they talk about unstructured data, what do we mean? And this is going to be a tremendous source of great value, because it's all kinds of data in all types of format. And I think it would be good for you to take a look at that and understand, so you can get a sense of why everyone is so stoked about this so stoked about it. Then here's another unstructured versus unstructured, and the big data problem. I was really struck last night. I watched. I'm a baseball fan. I know many of you are, and probably the majority of you are not. But I stayed up and I watched the wild card playoff between the Cubs and the Rockies, and I was struck. I think ESPN had two broadcasts. There was ESPN's broadcast, and then MLB Network had a broadcast. And the MLB Network broadcast was interesting because it was far more steeped in analytics. And they had all of these analytics about these players and what they did in particular situations and on and on. And I was just struck by all of that, and how, and if you've watched, just say, even like if you watch a regular game on ESPN or wherever, you have Amazon Web Services showing you where the batter hits the ball and how far the baseball went when the home run was hit. It just struck me with all of that data that they collected, and we're becoming more and more driven by that. This, I would say, if you were really, although I didn't say these are all required, I would say if you really, again, I want to emphasize this: if there is any one of these that I've got in this web safari that I'd say you absolutely positively ought to take a look at, it would be this. And talking about the right database for your strategy. As you recall, as we've gone through the text, and as we've gone through the course, and I'll just go back up to Vital Source, okay? And we'll go right here to Chapter 8, and we'll go back to these learning objectives, okay? And you'll see here's this familiar figure, okay, where we have some instructions, some business issues that we need to solve, and the management organization, and then how we feed all that into the information systems in order to come up with some business solutions to deal with some business challenges. So the big picture of which database should your company use, this article, this resource gives you a pretty good overview of that, okay? Now, in data administration, I spent some time talking about that, but I spent a lot of time for you just to understand what a data warehouse is and its value. But there isn't an issue where one size fits all. You need them tailored to your need, to your different needs, your industry, etc. So I would really, really, really encourage you to take a look at this and to look through it, because I think it has some good insights for you and will help you put some of that into perspective. All right. And again, this is just one of these issues where we're trying to make you think a little more globally or more of a macro basis about technology and what you can do in your company, okay, than we normally would do. Well, what we do in data admin or what we do in business problem analysis. This is the one where we start to say technologies. And let me give you an example to make it, to build on maybe let's take Oklahoma Baptist University. What do we do here for a living primarily? Well, what we do is we enroll students in accredited programs, and we have courses and degrees, and you progress through it, and you take loans or whatever you do, and we get paid to take you through for college education. And then you have a smattering of graduate programs. A key issue for us is, okay, what type of database system are we going to use to keep track of courses, grades, student performance, professors' loads, etc.? And so as time has evolved, there's a product out there, you all use it, it's called Banner. And Banner is the one that became the market leader because they recognized that the old days of where, when I was your age and I went across the thing, everybody knew everybody, and because it was a dinky little school, and hey Keith, how you doing? The registrar, as she was called, she pulled out an index set and said, well, you've taken this and this and this. But now you log in, and you can even go over into Degree Works and do what if scenarios and all that type of stuff. So that's what I'm talking about. The other is the use of learning platforms, say like Canvas, the use of technologies like Zoom, and I want to say this again, universities are not rich. Very few universities can really afford the top level kind of stuff you see when you say you turn into Fox News and there's 7 people from all over the world talking about a topic and they've got graphics and all this. In about 25 to 30 years, that'll be what will be happening in classrooms. Okay, not what we do now. It's just simply a matter of them miniaturizing things, getting them cheapened down, etc. But the choice of this type of technology becomes of great strategic importance because it has a lot to do with how we deliver courses, how many people we can handle in a given course, etc. Well, folks, I'm going to close it off from here. And again, I can't emphasize enough. I think this article is probably I think a great place for you to learn. And again, pop over to the modules, and you can do either 6.8, 6.9, or 6.10. All right, and there's some interesting ones to me. 6.10 is the most interesting because it's got some ask you to crunch some numbers. I just think it's kind of an interesting case to deal with. Then the interactive session, okay, and that's from pages 63 to 64 in the textbook, and you'll need to answer those questions. That's session 3, and I'm just going to go over here for a moment. And page 63 and 64 tells me it's going to be in chapter 1. So we'll go back over here for just a second. And we'll go down here to, here's it. And let me go back down to 63, 64. Maybe in chapter 2. So where I'm going to find it. Hang on a minute here. Yep, I guess I'm going to have to go back to chapter 2. Yeah. And so this is this is the interactive session, okay? And I want to take just a minute to look at it and talk about it just a little bit, okay? And it's over in pages 63, 64, and this is an interactive session that deals with state-of-the-art telepresence. Okay. Now, in a sense, as I'm beaming this to you, I'm kind of a telepresence. But imagine if I had a screen and I had a segue under the screen that would let me that I could maneuver around, say like you do a drone, or maybe like you have a sense of that when those of you who are gamers get a sense of it when you're working through a virtual world. But you could literally, I could go through the halls and you could see me and talk to me and all that stuff. That's what they're talking about. And Cisco is one of those companies trying to develop a telepresence. And the reason they're doing it is very simply, a global economy means that the talent pool is global, okay? And most of the people today, lower level folks, who get hired to work at a Google or a Facebook or an Apple or Microsoft, they're told, stay where you are, don't move. You don't need to. We're going to set you up in a telepresence so that you can beam in. And that's one of the reasons I think your experience with this, okay, is valuable for you, because it prepares you for what the workplace is going to be like. In 25 or 30 years, companies are going to get the best talent they can get from the world. They're not going to just limit themselves. And you can go on and look at these sites now. If they have these sites where employers can get 10,000 resumes in an hour, and they have a bot that'll look through it and give them recommend 20 people, I guarantee you this type of teleconferencing, telepresence, web conferencing, it'll be state of the art. Well, it'll be just the way we do business. And so the telepresence cases, that interactive session is a very, very interesting one, and one that has a lot of potential impact on all of you. Okay, well, folks, thank you again so much, and I look forward to seeing your work. And if no one has any questions, I'm going to sign off. One more time, anybody have any questions I can help you with? Okay, folks, thank you so much, and have a good one.